Everyone, Ollie here, and this is the 17th edition of Olly Ranks, where I'll be ranking Season 17 of Classic Doctor Who. So a little bit more on Season 17. This is Tom Baker's 6th season. This is where he surpasses John Pertwee in becoming the longest tenured Doctor, but obviously this doesn't last long because he literally leaves at the end of the next season. So Tom Baker obviously returns as the 4th Doctor, and Lalla Ward joins the cast as a new incarnation of Romana as Mary Mary Tam decided to leave in the last season because she didn't like the direction of Romana, where they were going with Romana. John Neeson doesn't return as well because he left due to a contract dispute and he's replaced by David Brierley. But John Neeson does return for season 18 and he leaves again. And Graham Williams returns as producer, and season 17 did have some production issues, such as unhappy writers and directors, which meant that the Destiny of the Daleks was Terry Nation's last contribution for Doctor Who. Alan Bromley walking out mid-production of directing Nightmare of Eden, which led to Graham Williams taking over direction, and a TV strike which left Shadow unfinished, which pretty much had season 17 only air 5 stories, and Shadow not being completed for at least another up to 40 years. So season 17 is also like an end of an era for some aspects of Doctor Who, as this is also the last season to air in the 1970s, an era that was pretty much a make or break point for Doctor Who. And Graham Williams actually leaves at the end of this season. He's replaced by John Nathan Turner, who pretty much showed up at the end credits from season 15 as one of the floor managers. I think he was a floor production unit manager or something like that, and he somehow became the main producer, which was quite odd, and I will get more into that when I get season 18. And John Nathan Turner pretty much remains producer until the end of Classic Who in 1989. But this is also the last season to use the 1967 theme tune, which was arranged from the original 1963 theme, and which was replaced by a new electric synth theme tune, which was used in season 18, along with a new sparkly opening. So, if we're not familiar with how this works, I'll be ranking all 6 stories from this season, which will include Shada, from my least favorite to my favorite story of the season, and I'll explain why the rankings of why I ranked it there. So, to kick things off, in 6th place is Nightmare of Eden, a story that did have some potential, but the overall drugs mystery was badly handled, and obviously talking about drugs is a very weird topic for Doctor Who to discuss. The plot was good on paper, but the execution was just terrible, and the cause of the plot was because one of the pilots was high on Viraxo, the drug in the story, and crashed into another ship, which had the drugs. And obviously, I think within that ship, there were monsters called Mandrills had escaped, including another guy that was trapped there. It was just very weird. And I do think the Mandrills had no point of being in the story. They're just there for the sake of it. But they were made for Viraxo, but if you remove them from the story, they don't have made much of a difference, and they could have replaced the Mandrills with a big stash of Viraxo somewhere. But I do feel like they could have done a bit more with the Mandrills, but it was just, yeah. The acting was okay. Tom Baker was fine, quite comedic. I did like the scene where he was pretty much fighting with the Mandrills and they pretty much tore apart his coat, which was quite comedic, I complained about. I think that was a good scene. Nala Ward was quite good. I did like the scene when she was pretty much almost killed by Rick because he got high from Viraxo, but his drink was spiked, so, and he was having withdrawal symptoms and pretty much thought that Romana had the Viraxo, and that was a very well acted scene. The side cast was alright. I like Shot, he was quite good. The villains weren't as interesting. They had no clear motive as to why they're smuggling the drugs. So I gave Nightmare Reading a 5 out of 10. In 5th place is The Horns of Nymon. A light-hearted story with some very hammy acting, but I think that did pretty much affect the story as a whole. But the plot was good. It was pretty much inspired by Theseus and the Minotaur, a Greek myth, which pretty much laid the foundation of the story. And as I said before, the acting was quite hammy, and I was surprised because Lalla Ward did hammy very well, and it pretty much made her more of a mini version of the Doctor, complete with her of her own outfit that very much looked like the Doctor's outfit, her own sonic screwdriver, how she was confronting villains and all that. And Tom Baker was also quite good. He was also quite funny as well. I did like the part when he was in the TARDIS and he thought that they were going to get destroyed, and that him and Kane are getting destroyed by the TARDIS, and he pretty much hung on to Kane for dear life as if he was going to die. So I think his comedic skills does actually carry the story. Good side cast, but I do have an issue. I do have an issue because that was aside from the pacing, I think the comedy pretty much overshadowed the main overlying issue, and that was the Nymons were pretty much committing genocide, and that was never acknowledged in the story. So I give the Haunts of Nymon a 7 out of 10. In fourth place is Destiny of the Daleks. The Daleks, along with Davros, returned to Doctor Who after a near 5-year absence. The plot was quite good, as it was pretty much a sequel to Genesis of the Daleks, and after the Daleks were able to escape Skaro, Davros was just abandoned there, and it was explained how he was able to survive because he had some sort of energy. He was running on emergency power, and the Daleks returned to Skaros so they can find Davros and help him, so he can help them get out of the impasse with the Mervellans, who were another robot race who they were fighting. The acting was quite good, and I like how this story pretty much remembers how the Doctor was still quite wary of Davros, and he was pretty much threatening to blow him up if the Daleks didn't release the slaves. And I did like how they explained the whole impasse that the Mervellans and the Daleks are having by the use of rock paper scissors. Very comedic, but it was very easy to understand. Lala Ward also makes her debut as the second Romana, and she does a great job. I do like how this story actually goes out to make. I do like how this story actually sets out to make to point out the difference between Romana 1 and Romana 2. And Romana 2 was quite well acted. She's quite resourceful compared to the first Romana because she pretty much learned from the Doctor, so to speak, and it did help her a lot in the story. And I did like how she was being interrogated by the Daleks. I think Lala Wood acted that scene quite well. She was even crying, and then she pretty much escaped from the Daleks when they put her to slavery by faking her own death. I think the fault this story had, I think the Daleks had some very bad dialogue, so I give the Destiny of the Daleks an 8 out of 10. Now we are on our top 3 stories of this season. In third place is The Creature from the Pit. A very underrated story in my opinion. Part of the story works and other parts didn't really work. The acting was quite good. Adastra was a very good villain, played by Myra Francis. Tom Baker did a great job of the comedy in the story, especially when he was hanging from the pit ledge. Lala Ward was quite good, even though the criticism I do have was that she was pretty much acting as if she was the first Romana, and this wasn't her fault because when David Fisher wrote the story, he was having the first Romana in mind. So, but I do think they could have at least made some amendments to the script to accommodate that. But she acted them very well, but it was a bit out of character for this Romana. But she did manage to do a good job. I did like the twist that Erato, the creature from the pit, was pretty much sealed there, not because because of Adastra. It wasn't as if he was a pet of Adastra's, because he actually came onto the planet as an ambassador because his planet was a glue of minerals and he tried to strike a deal with Adastra, but she didn't want to give her monopoly, so she pretty much trapped in the pit for 15 years. Yes, and obviously whilst in the pit, Arato is pretty much communicating with the people back on his planet to destroy Chloris. So obviously this meant that Chloris was not a villain. The humans typecast are quite good. The parts that didn't really work was Romana herself, and as I said before, it was a bit over the top and it was a bit out of character. And I do think this story pretty much didn't have quite a few tropes that we had seen before in Doctor Who, so it did get a bit old and tired, but it still worked in a way. So I gave The Creature from the Pit another 8 out of 10. In second place is Shada. The filming of Shada was unfinished due to the BBC strikes, and it was recreated in many forms, including an animated version, that pretty much covered the parts that wasn't filmed. But the plot was very good, and I do think this was definitely one of Douglas Adams' best scripts for Doctor Who, and it's a shame that he didn't think so. I thought the acting was quite good, so to speak. The side cast very good. I really liked Kristen Clare and Cornutus. Faults, I would say I would have a Shadow because it was pretty obvious that it was Predator to make it a six-parter, and Romana didn't really have much to do in the story. But she did have good chemistry along with the Doctor and Chris and Claire and Cornutus. And I really liked the filming location of Cambridge. That was quite well done. So I gave Shadow an 8.5 out of 10. And in first place, City of Death. Woohoo! A wonderful, wonderful story that's a wonder to watch. And it's one of Doctor Who's greatest stories ever for a damn good reason. The acting was superb. I think this is definitely one of Tom Baker's best performances as the Fourth Doctor. He's very comedic and he really complemented the story and actually did help City of Death become a very memorable story. Julian Glover was a very good villain as Count Scarleone. He didn't need to be a shouty villain. He was cold and suave, just like Skagger and Shadow. And I think Duggan, another side character / full companion, he worked really well with the Doctor Romana. I think he was definitely one of the more memorable parts of this story, along with the clever dialogue. Most of it was pretty much directed at him. I could go on and how great the City of Death is, but my review's there. So, City of Death gets a well-deserved 10 out of 10. So to conclude, season 17 is a step up from the Key to Time, but it does have its faults, and pretty much the faults is because of how comedic it is, and it pretty much remains from the last season and season 15. I do feel like it's a good low-key send-off for Doctor Who in the 1970s, and I look forward to a new decade. Graham was an alright producer, but he was an alright producer, but I think he definitely made Doctor Who too comedic. Well, he was actually brought in to make Doctor Who more lighter because Hinchcliffe pretty much made Doctor Who too dark to the extent where Mary Whitehouse was pretty much complaining, and they pretty much had to give in to her complaints by getting rid of Hinchcliffe. But I think the comedy did pretty much ruin his producing era of Doctor Who because he overdid it and it pretty much overshadowed certain aspects, and pretty much Tom Baker was too comedic in this aspect, and which pretty much caused John Nathan Turner to try and fix the whole over comedic issue in Doctor Who when he took over as showrunner. But I'll talk a bit more on JNT as soon as possible. But I think season 17 is a good season and definitely Graham Williams' best season, so I give it an A-. So my next set of reviews will be Tom Baker's final season, which will be season 18, the day which Tom Baker steps down as the Doctor, and a day many thought will never come. And of course, this is the first season that Jonathan Turner produces, and we're in the 80s now! Yay! So thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of season 17 and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already, and follow me on the social media sites linked in the description. Until then, see you later.